Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. In the previous video, we learned about special functions or special methods in Python when you're dealing with classes. We have learned about how we can use the string function, representation, init function. We also learned about how arithmetic works using the add, sum, multiplication and all that. If you're facing any difficulties in knowing about all these special functions, please comment it, I'll try to solve them. And I hope you have gone through. Please go through all of this, okay? Go through all of this. If still you are facing any problem, please comment or I'll try to solve them. We also have created one Telegram group for discussion. You can join that group and we can discuss there. You can send your snippets and all that, and I'll try to solve your problem. Today we'll be learning one of the most important part of class, that is inheritance. Okay, when you learn about inheritance, then you'll slowly come to understand how classes can benefit you in your future project or why we're using classes basically. For now it may seem like why we need classes, we're not making any useful use of it. But when you learn inheritance, right, you'll understand that classes serves a purpose, and that purpose becomes generalized. You start understanding how this works and what its capabilities are. So we'll be learning about inheritance. It's similar how you speak in English. Like inheritance, if you go in biological form, it goes like you get some characteristic from your parents or your parents' lineage, right? Like color of your skin, hair, some facial structure and all that. That is inheritance. You inherit some of the properties from your parents or your grandparents or your ancestor. Right? Similarly, when we come in our man-made architecture, right, we come over like inheriting some properties from our parents or ancestral property like this. Similarly, inheritance also work in the same way. So first we'll be learning why we need inheritance. Then we'll know how we can define inheritance in Python and how we'll go forward. So first let's see why we need inheritance. Okay. So let me create two classes. So now we have created two classes, class person and class student. Let me put them side by side so that you can see them. So if I put side by side, this is person and this is the student class. Okay. I haven't created the classes here because we already know how to create classes, right? In the previous two videos, we learned how to create class, how this special function, how the init function works. If you don't know, please watch the previous two videos. There we have talked how the introduction to classes, and we have know how we can create classes and how we can create function inside classes. Why we need this self keyword and all that. Please watch the previous video. For now, we are just going to inheritance. Okay, we won't be going to what classes, how to create classes. Please watch the previous two videos. Okay, so we have two classes here, class person and class student. Student I put it in the right hand side so that you can compare between these two. You see there is an init function in person, right? And what it does, it has two variables. One is name, age, and name and age are passed as an in the init function. It is passed as an parameter. Then we have one function called display person info and displaying the name and age of this person. Similarly, in the student class, we have three variables: name, age, ID, and this also has one function called display student info and it's displaying the info name, age, and ID. But if you see these two classes closely, right, you can see that this two property, right, this name and age is repeating for both the classes. So when we have learned about function, right, so we know in computer when we start programming, we follow a concept called DRY, that is, do not repeat yourself. So we are repeating here, right, for the both the classes. It means the same thing, name and age for both student and person. And when we are displaying, there also we are doing the name and age. Here also we are displaying name and age. So is there a way how we can minimize this so that we can use this class inside this class so that we don't have to write this thing again and again? So this is not always the case. You don't want to do this for every classes. But here if you see, the person and student are related, right? So a student is a person, right? If you go in a generalized, so I say, right, these classes follow the concept of real world. So go in the real world form. So you know, student is a person. So whatever a person will have, student will have them, and it will have some additional field like student ID, school, and all that, right? So is there a way how we can get these properties, like in the how I said in the architecture of our architecture, how we inherit some property from our parent? Is there any way how student can inherit the property from the person? So that is how the inheritance work. Now let me show you how we can do the inheritance in the student so that we can take property from the person itself and we don't have to redefine it here. Okay, so how we do that? So suppose this is a student class, right, and we want the property of person. You put in parenthesis here and you write the name of the class you want to inherit properties from. Suppose here that class is person. Now if you run this, okay, let's create one class called student1, and we'll create student. Okay, and let's do print of. We can't create a directly a student. Why? Because we know there are some properties. So okay, let's run this so that we see why we can or why we cannot. So now if you run this Python 19, it's not 10, it's 19. We are in the 19th lecture by now. If you see, it throws an error because name, age and ID were not passed. Now if you pass a name and age and ID, so suppose let's name it ABC, and the age is 1 and the ID is, suppose let's say 123. Okay, now if you run this ran, but you may be saying like, but we did not get what we wanted, right? We wanted to minimize the things, like we wanted to remove this name and age from the student so that we can inherit from the person. So to inherit this, there are some special keyword that you need to use. So one of the special keyword is called, okay, before going to the special keyword, let me say one thing. When you create a student, right? Okay, let's do one thing. Let's call here print calling person. Okay, and here let's do one more called print calling student, so that we know like why we use this keyword. Okay, the keyword that I'll be quoting just now. Now if you run this once again. Okay, if you see, it's only calling student, but it's not calling the person, right? But we have said that we want that everything or the person should be coming to student by using this parenthesis, right? But it's not coming. So why is it not working? So when you inherit something like this person in the student, right, it does not work automatically. You need to say the init function, should it call some other init or what, or how this function should this function also be called inside this. To do that, what you need to do, you need to use the super function. Okay, so what is super function? So if you call here super, super, what this super function does, super function gives you access to the parent class. So for student, the parent class is person, right? Because that is inside the parenthesis. Super will give you access to the parent class. Now what we need to call the init function, right? So we'll say super dot init, and we'll put we have the name and age, right? So let's do one thing. Let's not call this. Let's not put anything inside the init and see how it works. Now if you run this, see, it will throw an error. It says person.init missing to record, but we did not write person here, right? So how did it know person? So when it says super, this will call the parent of it. So here the parent is the person, and person requires two field, name and age. That's why it's saying it's missing two field, name and age. But now if you pass here name and age, if you say name and age and run this once again, see, this time what it says, it says calling student, it says calling person also. So when you are creating an instance of the student, now it will also get access to all the functionalities of this person using this super keyword. Now let me do one thing. Let's print here, print student1 dot name. Okay, and let's run this once again. See, now you get ABC, right? But let's remove this. In the student we have name, right? So you may be thinking that's why it's coming, but let's remove the name from here and run this once again. See, you still get the ABC. Why? Because now when you're calling this init, right, so it's putting the self.name as person. In the person, this name is going here and is putting the self. Now since you're inheriting the person, right, so all this functionality, right, all this name, age will also be part of the student. For now, don't think about like what if we don't want that name and age should not go to the inheriting property. We don't want to. That we'll discuss when we'll discuss about private and all that. Then we'll come to that. But for now, you see, when you call this super function with the init, right, everything will be initialized here. And since you're inheriting the person, all the variables function you will have, the student will have access to. Now what you can do, you can remove this age also. Why? Because when you are passing the age, we are passing it here also, right? And that was our main motto. How do we remove this from here so that we don't have to write the same thing again and again? Now if let's print the age also, let's put here age. You see, in the student there is no age right now. We have commented on both of them. Now let's put once again. See, this time you get the age also, you get the name also, and it's calling both student and person. Because of this super function, this super function will give you access to the parent, but for that you need to define the parent inside this parenthesis of the child class. Okay, your child class is the student. Now this is the one way of getting access to the variable. How do you get access to the function? So can we do something like this? Can we do student? Is it returning something? No, it's displaying, right? Can we do something like student1 dot get person or that this one, right? This function, can we get this person info? Let's do something like this. Now if you run this, see, we get name and age. Name and age is defined here. But how come that we could get access to the function but not, how we did not use the init? For the init we need to use the super init. So when you want to run something specific, right? So when you inherit something like person, you get access to everything. You get access to the display info or all the functions of it. But since you need to set something, right, you need to provide some value, like you need to provide some value here. So for providing that, that's only why we are using super.init, and we are using init inside the init function of student itself, because when we want that the student should also get initialized when a student, means the person should also get initialized when a student is initialized. That's why we are calling super.init. But we don't need, if it's already defined, or if self.name was already defined, we could have direct access to this. Like when you call the function, right, we did not use the super keyword anywhere inside this for calling this function, but we can call directly. This is because we're inheriting the property. So now student will have access to all the function that is part of this person. You don't have to use the super keyword, but we use the super keyword here because we want to run this function when our init function run. Or else if we did not use this, what we need to call the init from outside, but we don't want to do that, right? We want to call this whenever a student is calling the init. And when we create an instance, right, init is called automatically. So we want to call this init of the person also whenever this init is called. That's why I use this init keyword. Now when you do display person info, it is coming here ABC and 1, if you see this, right? Now if you see here in the display student info, right, there also we have name and age. Can we do one thing? Can we say when we display student info, it should get the name and age from the parent class? So how we can do this? So what you can do, you can comment this too, and here you can use a super keyword. Since I said you, right, to get access to function of the parent class from a child class, right, not from outside. From outside you will get direct access, but if you want to access from the child class to a parent class, you can use the super function. This super function will give access to your parent class. So what you can do, you can do super dot display person info. Now what this will do, these two things, right, this will getting printed inside this function. Now we are calling this function, that's why these two things will get printed automatically. Now what we can do, let's remove this and directly call student1 dot display. Instead of person info, we'll do student info, because now we know it will print for everything. Now if you run this, see, we get the name, we get the age, we get the ID also. Previously we are getting only name and age because person did not have access to ID. But now inside the display student info, we're first calling the person info, then we are saying what are the left one, then we are calling it directly from the student info. So this is how inheritance work. Let me explain it once again, since this may be a complicated topic if you are learning for the first time. So let me clear this out and let's split it into two parts so that you can see what we are doing. Okay. First we have a class called person, and it will have two properties, name and age, where we can put the name and age that is coming from the init. Okay. Then we have display person info. Then we are displaying the name and age of this person. Now we have one more class called student. And how do we inherit the property of person in student? Is using this parenthesis. Inside the parenthesis we pass the parent class. Now when you pass the parent class, the init function is not called automatically. That is, this name and age will not get set, and this init function of the person will not be called when we create an instance of the student, because person will only be created when we create an instance of person. So how can we call this init function? To call this init function, there is a special function called super that can be used to call the parent. Any functionality of parent can be called using this super function. So what we do, whenever we create an instance of student, we call the init function of the person also, and we pass all the required details. Then, and if you wanted to get access to the function also from the child class, then you can use the super function. But when you are creating an instance, right, suppose here we are creating an instance of student, here we don't need to use the super keyword. This, since we are inheriting, right, since the person is getting inherited in the student, it will have access to the student object, right, it will have access to all the function of this person. Like for here, this, for example, here, right, this function is class of person, right, is part of person, but student instance will have access to it since it is inheriting it here. That's why we can call this function. But what we did not call this. Instead we call the display student, that is part of the student. And here inside this we call the superclass, because we want first it should display all the things related to that person, then it should relate to the student. So that is how inheritance works. I hope you got the basic concept. Now let's do one more example. I think you'll understand a little bit better in that place. So let me comment out this, and we'll create some more classes and I'll show you how it's done. Okay. So let's take an example. We created two classes. One class is called camera, one class is called player. Okay. And what does the camera do? It will either click a photo or record a video. That is whatever you call, whichever function you call, it will do. Suppose if you call click photo, it's a clicking a photo, and you'll say record video, then it will recording a video. Then we have one more class called player that can either play music or play video based on whatever function you call. Okay. Now suppose camera and player. Now you know a smartphone can have both camera and player, right? It will have both of them. So how can we inherit both of them? For now we have learned only how we can inherit person. There is only one child inheriting only one parent class, right? But how can a child class inherit two parent? So that is what we will be learning now. Now let's create one more class called smartphone. Okay. Now if you see, there is a class called smartphone, and let's remove this for now, just for sign. And it has a functionality called boot that will start the phone. Okay. So I'm just making the function so that it becomes similar like what we are trying to accomplish here. Let me split this, okay, so that you can see it more clearly. This smartphone, okay. So this smartphone, it can boot, but you know smartphone can also have a camera, can also have a player. How do you inherit this? So I've done an inheritance. When inside this parenthesis, whatever classes you pass, that will be inherited for this smartphone. So let's call here camera, CAMERA, camera. And if you want to inherit more than one class, right, put a comma and write the next class name. So here player. So what this will do, what this will help us doing is, now the smartphone will not only boot, but it can also click a photo, it can record a video, it can play music, and it can play video. Let's see for example what this can do. First let's create a class, let's create an instance of camera. Okay, camera, and we'll say CAMERA. Now if you print this, print, or else it's not print, it's just say camera dot click photo, and we'll say instead of click photo we'll say record video, and here we'll say play music. Now if you have learned clearly about class, you know this will throw an error in one case. So let me show you. So now if I run this once again, okay, see it throws an error, say object has no attribute play music. But if I comment this play music and run this, see it's a clicking a photo, recording a video. So this is what this camera lacks, right? So this camera cannot play music or play video, and this player cannot click photo or record video. So these are their obstacle, right? But in smartphone requires both of them. So what can we do? We can create a smartphone class and we inherit both camera and player inside this smartphone, so that we can get all of this feature inside a smartphone. So now let me create one class called smartphone. Okay, smartphone, and we'll let smartphone. Here we are not passing any parameter inside this parenthesis because we don't have any init function and we don't need any extra variable. So now when you run smartphone dot boot, and let's run this, see it says starting the phone because we have starting the phone. But this now this smartphone will also have access to photo and video. How? If you write smartphone dot click photo and run this, see it says clicking a photo. How did it have access to click a photo where this is part of camera and this is smartphone? It's because we're inheriting all the properties. When inside the parenthesis, when you pass the name of the class, right, this will inherit all the functionality. So whenever you create an instance of smartphone, it will have access to all the functionality of the parent classes also. So here just like click photo, you can also play music. You can say play music and run this, and see you say playing a music. But this, the class like camera and player did not have access to, like camera did not have access to play music and player did not have access to click photo. But here smartphone is inheriting both camera and player. It will have access to all the properties that this camera and this player have access to. So that is what makes inheritance more powerful. You can think of so many things like this, like we are avoiding how repeating. Suppose we did not use the inheritance, right? So what we have to do, we have, inside this smartphone we have to write these functions once again. Suppose you think someone else is developing a camera, someone else is developing a player. So when you create a smartphone, you have to develop the camera once again. So that is a waste of resource, right? What if we can use whatever they are providing, just put it inside our camera. like use it as a third party module, right? So that is how this inheritance became useful. Here we are not creating the camera from ourselves, we're not creating the player by ourselves, but it's already created. We are just putting it inside. We are inserting this camera and player inside our smartphone class. So the smartphone class will have access to both camera and player functionalities. So that is what inheritance help us achieving. That is how classes becomes more powerful as we start learning about inheritance. There are so many properties. There are also abstraction, singleton, and all that. We'll be learning about the story slowly. Then you'll start understanding the capabilities of classes and how we can move from function to classes and just open up a new window of things, how we can achieve further things, like we can broad things we can accomplish in a smaller span, or how reading of code become understandable. Like if you create as many functionalities, it will become confusing, but when someone sees this class, right, smartphone, they'll know, okay, there are two more classes called camera and player. They'll have some functionality and I can go and see them and see what are the functions they provide, so that when I create an instance of the smartphone, I can have access to all this functionality also. So that is what inheritance is. Let me recap of what we learned today, then we'll say what we'll learn in the next class. And there, it's not the end of inheritance. Okay, inheritance also has some more caveat, it also has some more problem here and there, and there is also multi-level inheritance. We'll learn in the next class, but for now for the basic understanding of inheritance, this should be all you need. Just practice what I said, practice all the things that we are learning here, and if you have any difficulties, just comment out. This is a little bit complicated topic, so you may face difficulties, but don't wait there. You ask the question, I'll be there to help you. So let me recap of what inheritance does. Okay, you understood what inheritance is, right? Inheritance is getting some properties from your ancestor or your parent and taking this properties. Same thing is followed in inheritance in programming. Let's look at the first example. So we have a class called person, we have a class called student, and in the person we have two field, name and age, and in the student also we have name, age and ID. So here name and age was repeating, and we want that it should not repeat, since we know student and person are related. So a student is always a person, so that it can they are relatable, right? We don't use inheritance just because we can use it. We don't use it. We use it when things match, right? You don't want a, suppose you have table and you have student. You don't want table and student should have a table and furniture can be a good combination, because you know table is part of furniture, right? So try to combine them where it fits, so that the user using it should understand like how the mechanism work, right? So we took an example of person and student because we know student is a person at the end, right? He became a student because he goes to school, he learns and all that. So now when the difference is student will have some school ID, school roll number, school class and all that. The person may not have that. So what we did, we inherited all the properties of a person like the name, age, and we combined with the student. How we did this? We use a parenthesis and we name the class here. When we name this, now the student will have access to all the functionality, all the functions of the person the student will have access to. But since it does not call the init function by its own, right, use a special function called super function. This super function can only be used in base class, okay, so that we can get access to the parent class. What we can do, we can put a dot operator and access any field from this person class. So we can access any function. So we access the init function and we pass the name in it, so that the setting happens here itself. Okay? So we can set it here itself and we don't have to reset it again here. Similarly, in the display student info, first we know to display student info, first we should display all the personal info, right? So what we did here also, we use the super function and we call this person info itself. Then we call the student personal student info. So this is how we can use the super function. Knowing the super function is also very useful. Just know super function gives us the ability to access property from the parent function. That is as simple as it can get. Don't complicate yourself by saying how is super is useful, how is all that. We'll be learning about how super can make things complicated and how we can overcome them also. Okay. Then now when we create an instance of student, we'll have access to name and age, even though name and age is not part of this student class, but since it's part of this person class, we can still have the access. And we can also have access to parent class function without having the super function outside of class. Outside of class, super function has no value. Okay, this is inside the child class only, and we can have access to the function however we were using in the previous one. Then we learn about one more thing, that we can access more than one class. We can inherit more than one class. So you can not only inherit like in the biological form, right? You can not only inherit from your father, you can also inherit some properties from your mother. So this we can combine many. So Here also we can combine many fields. So we took an example of a camera and player, where camera is used for clicking photo and recording video, and for player is for playing music and playing video. What we did, we created a class called smartphone that is inheriting both camera and player. So we can access to recording a video also and playing the video also. So here we saw this camera won't have access to record video or play music. Why? Because there are different classes. But when we inherit the camera and player both the smartphone will access to all the properties that this camera and player has access to. So that is what inheritance is. Please go through this example once again and see if you have any difficulties of understanding, or create some classes of your own and see how inheritance, how some things are not allowed, some things are allowed. If you find any difficulties, please comment out. Okay, so that was it for the basic introduction to inheritance. It's not a complete class. In the next class we'll learn some more problems in inheritance and a different type of inheritance. Okay, so now let's push this to GitHub. So like git add, let's see what are the changes we made. So we made changes to inheritance. So the git add 19. It's not git, it's git add. So git add is added. So we'll say git commit message, and we'll write inheritance. Okay, now let's push this. Git push origin main. It will get pushed, and okay, now let's click on this link, and this should take us to our GitHub. So now if you see this and go to the end, should be the 19 inheritance, and let's see. Yes, you can see all of this got pushed. Okay, so now, so yeah, that was it about inheritance. Okay, this is a basic introduction to inheritance. If you're facing any difficulties, please comment out. Okay, I'll try to solve. I know it's a bit complicated. Even the class, you don't get used to like why we need classes, but you should start understanding this inheritance. Then we'll learn something about abstraction. Then we'll learn about something called singleton. Then we'll start understanding like, yeah, class do make sense in a larger scope. Okay, so yeah, that was it for inheritance, and I think that was it for today. Thank you for watching. See you in the next.